Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. It's about to become cheaper and easier to get your driver's licence in New Zealand. Changes include scrapping the second practical test, a longer 12-month learner period for under 25s, new restricted periods, and an expanded zero alcohol rule for all learner and restricted drivers, regardless of your age. Transport Minister Chris Bishop has said the aim is to make licensing more efficient and affordable. The new system will take effect from the end of January next year. But will the first major change to the system in 15 years make our roads safer? Today on The Front Page, AA Road Safety Manager Dylan Thomsen is with us to dive into the details of this new system. First off, Dylan, this announcement, what was your first reaction?
I think that it's a pretty well-balanced mix of changes from the government. They have been really focused on wanting to reduce costs and make it a bit cheaper and easier for people to get to a full licence. The AA, we were really focused on trying to make sure those changes were actually going to lead to better prepared, safer young drivers. And so we're really pleased that there are some measures in there that yes, we're going to not have a full licence test anymore, but we're actually going to hopefully encourage more training and more practice amongst learner drivers, and we're really pleased to see that.
Now, we've known that this has been in the works for a while now, since last year or something, I think. What's changed between now and then?
Well, the original proposal didn't have any changes around the length of period for learner drivers. And so the original proposal was going to have no full licence test. The learner period would have stayed much as it was, and some tougher consequences for people on a restricted licence who broke the rules. And what we've seen change is we're still not going to have the full licence test, but the learner period is now going to be 12 months as a default instead of 6, unless learner drivers complete a certain amount of supervised practice hours or some professional training. They can shorten that learner period. And also they've kind of simplified the way they were going to look at penalties for people on a restricted licence breaking the rules. And we think what they've come up with, which is essentially if you're on a restricted licence and you commit a driving offence that comes with demerit points, it'll add 6 months to your restricted period. That is a much simpler way of doing it than what they had proposed before, which was pretty complicated.
How has getting your licence changed over the years?
Well, I mean, if we go back a few decades now, we just had one test, and it was done by the police or traffic cops. And it was very, very quick and basic in many cases. You people can talk to some older family members, and they might tell a story of going to the police station, getting in the car, and spending maybe 10 minutes doing a short drive before somebody said, "That's it, good enough," and you got your licence. Then back in 2011. We saw some quite significant changes. The minimum driving age went up from 15 to 16, and the restricted test got made quite a bit tougher, more challenging. And since then, this is really the next really significant bunch of changes in New Zealand's driver licensing history. So hopefully, we're kind of catching up with the rest of the world, because the research that the AA's done while this issue's been going on showed that it's been quicker and easier to get a licence in New Zealand than pretty much any other country.
I laughed at the first bit about older family members because there was always this thing in our family. Apparently, my nana got her license because her family knew the police officer in her town and they baked him some like cookies or something. And it showed. You would not want to be in a car with that woman, let me tell you. So you mentioned pricing there a little bit. Currently, the cost of getting your Class 1 license is $362.50. And under the new system, you're saving around $80. Is there any information to suggest that the fee itself and how expensive it is to get your license is actually impeding people from getting their full license?
Well, I think there's a little bit more to it than just that financial fee, because certainly we've got a bit of a problem in New Zealand with people getting to their restricted licence and then not progressing beyond that, never going on to a full licence. We've had a substantial number of drivers that have just sat there and never gone on to the full test. The financial cost is a part of that, where nobody likes to spend money if they don't have to. But I think the other thing is the cost and time has probably been a bigger impact in certain parts of the country, in particular, some of the more provincial or remote areas. To get to the location to do that full test may take somebody an hour or two driving each way. That can mean when people are a bit older and maybe they're working, that they might have to look at taking a day off work to travel to the location to do the test, hopefully pass it, and then drive home. And of course, if they didn't pass, then there was going to need to be a second day. So I think the financial cost is something that, for some people, especially if you're a household that is really, really struggling to pay the bills as it is, that is a small impact financially, that $80. But the time factor might be a bigger one for a bunch of people that they just found it a hassle that they weren't motivated enough to overcome to get that full test done.
The reality is younger drivers are just riskier on the roads, and I think people kind of intuitively understand that. And so, the changes we've made are calibrated towards that risk profile and making sure that essentially what we're doing is we're shifting the assessment and shifting the work that's required to get your licence away from where you know how to drive and it's just about getting the test or getting the assessment done, and shifting it down towards the bit where it makes the biggest difference, which is when you're initially learning how to drive.
There will also be an option for under 25s to reduce their 12-month learner period back to 6 months, you mentioned before, by recording those practice hours or completing an approved practical course. What is stopping people from fudging these numbers?
The way it's done most places we've looked at is with an app, and the way it works is the driver has the app on their phone. Whoever are going to be their supervisors, mum, dad, an uncle and auntie, a grandparent, they also need to have that app. And when you are going to record some practice time, you push a button saying, I'm going to start a practice drive. A message gets sent to the supervising driver and they have to approve that. And then the app uses GPS to actually record, and it can tell that the phone is in motion and it's in a car. And so it'll keep a track of how much time you clock up until that drive finishes. So that's one way to avoid people just sitting at home and saying, I'm going to look to clock up an hour or two while I'm sitting here watching a movie. So you can't do that. And they also tend to just have a bit of tech running in the background, so they have an idea of how long it normally takes people to accumulate a certain amount of hours, and they can see your history. So if somebody has done very little supervised practice hours in the app, and then all of a sudden it suddenly takes off and they get up to what they need to in a very short space of time, that would raise some flags, and then the authorities normally look to get in touch, ask a few questions just to try and check and decide if they think you've genuinely done that time. So the systems work to try and make it hard for people to cheat them. There's never any system that is 100% foolproof, but it's a lot better than what we've got right now, where you don't actually have to do anything. You could get your learner license, do no practice at all, and then just give it a crack. Try your restricted test, see how it goes. That'd be a terrible thing to try and do, and you're probably going to fail. But this way, it at least encourages people to put in more practice.
Yeah, so it's not like the old days where you just fill out a logbook with, I've heard of people doing it with different coloured pens with their parent and just signing them off. And by that, I mean, that sounds like something I did 20 years ago.
Because Australia's been doing this for quite some time, so New Zealand is catching up, and there is still some paper logbook options available. What the evidence and the research looking at this shows, though, that even in cases where people are fudging a little bit, they're still doing more practice than they would have done if there was no requirements. So, even if somebody didn't actually quite genuinely get to that 80 hours or 100-hour target or whatever it is, they actually got quite close, and without it, they were doing a lot less. So it tends to just encourage more practice than what was happening before.
Yeah, so with 16-year-old Chelsea in mind, I actually wrote to the minister asking this question about these practice hours, and they wrote back saying, the Director of Land Transport will set the minimum number of hours with a maximum of 60 hours and the process for recording them, and this will be communicated publicly before the new system comes into effect, of course, in January next year. So we're yet to know the exact details, but at least we know that it's a maximum of 60 hours, I suppose.
Yeah. And when we have looked at this at the AA, we think 60 hours is a good number. Most overseas jurisdictions have targets between 60 up to 120 hours. And the evidence shows that if you get to that 60-hour level, generally there's been about a 10 to 20% reduction in crashes involving young drivers after that system has been implemented.
Oh, wow.
And so we think that a conservative estimate that if we bring in that 60-hour level, we would be looking at somewhere between 10 to 20 less young people losing their lives in crashes every year on our roads.
Oh, that's incredible. So hopefully people do get the incentive and make their learner period to 6 months and take that incentive and actually practice before they get onto the road. When the idea was first announced, I saw motorsport legend Greg Murphy. He said the move to remove the full licence practical test is nothing short of ludicrous. He said there were too many Kiwi drivers who weren't prepared for the road.
Yeah. Well, when we looked at the original proposal, we said removing the full test was something that we thought could be done in New Zealand if we were going to beef up the requirements around practice and preparation in that learner stage, and also have tougher consequences for breaking the rules when you're on your restricted licence. So we kind of felt, yep, we can look at not having that second test anymore, but if we want to make sure that we're trying to maintain our safety, and in fact, what we want to see is actually improving driving and improving road safety, then we need to balance getting rid of that test with more requirements early on. And we've seen the government has made some changes in that regard, so we're really pleased to see that. It's not so much about the length of time until you're going from a learner's to a restricted. It's about how much practice you do in that time. That is the key thing. And we really hope that we're going to see something come in around that 60-hour practice requirement mark. And so if people are wanting to move on to their restricted licence quicker than 12 months, they've got that incentive to get out there, clock up more hours, and all that means really is that people get more exposure to a wider range of situations on the road, circumstances, different weather conditions, and the more time you clock up, the better prepared you are. And it's just that difference of when you start off as a learner, you are so focused on trying to control the car and what your feet are doing with the pedals, what your hand is doing with the steering wheel, that they often really struggle to focus out looking at what's happening on the road around them. The more time they clock up and the better experience and the better training they get, the more they're able to look out, see things and react quicker. And that's why you see that difference in crash reduction.
Why is this important to us? Why is it important to me as the Minister for Social Development and Employment? We know that 70% of jobs require a driver's licence. And so it is really important that we provide assistance and support all the way through for people to get their driver's licence. And we've met a wide range of people here today who are in that process. So whether it's for them driving legally, we do know that if we can avoid a first contact with the justice system by somebody driving legally, that is fantastic.
What impacts could these changes have on New Zealand's road safety?
Well, we're really hoping that this is actually going to be a bit of a milestone moment where we start having better prepared young drivers, where we start taking learning to drive more seriously in New Zealand. And the long-term effects of that could be huge. If we start right with better training and better culture, that just flows on. What people tend to learn early on often sticks with them for decades or through their whole driving life. So if we start better and people have more knowledge, better skills, a better culture around, hey, there's rules here and it's important that we stick to them, then in another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, all those drivers are still on the roads and have started off from those habits. As I said before, the crash reductions, we think there's the potential for 10 to 20% reduction in crashes, which would work out at about 10 to 20 lives saved and somewhere around 60 to 120 serious injuries amongst young people every year and hundreds of minor crashes.
It's funny you say that the stuff that you learn when you first learn to drive, because my driving instructor back in the day, I reckon I went to after high school and he would teach me, and I've still got John's voice when I do a parallel park in my ear. I can still hear him, so that's so true. The stuff that, and I'm a very good parallel parker, by the way. Thanks, John.
Nice work, John. I'm the same. It sticks with me, different experiences, and that's why. We're also huge advocates of the AA for anybody that can get some professional training. You do the supervised practice with your kids, but get some professionals involved, because then they get exposed to the expertise, the professional knowledge, a whole bunch of things that mum and dad often don't know or may have forgotten. And so, trying to just more practice hours, professional training, if you can, makes a huge difference.
Oh, huge difference. And it didn't end in tears like it did with my dad in the car trying to learn parallel parking. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.